Welcome everybody to The Thoughtful Bro. We're here streaming live on a Mighty Blaze as usual every Tuesday at 2. We have a fantastic quasi-legendary figure in the American arts on the show today with us, Mark Leyner. Yes, I'm going to get to that in a moment. So just a little bit of intro as usual. For those who may not know, A Mighty Blaze is a volunteer initiative started by a bunch of publishing industry folks like myself who saw all our friends and friends of friends getting their book tours canceled at the beginning of COVID. And so we started trying to go online to try to connect readers and authors in the best of all cases on the day that the author is publishing, which is what we have today, which is great. But recent interviews that you can watch that we've done are Lionel Shriver, Tom Perrotta, Phil Cly, Erica Jong, John Irving, Judy Bloom, and so many more. You can just go through our library online on YouTube or Facebook and find those interviews. If you want to support us, honestly, we don't ask for any money. All we ask is that you like us and subscribe to us on our socials, and probably it would really be helpful to us if you just bought the book of whoever we're interviewing, or buy a copy for all your friends as well. We're going to have questions at the end. As usual, just pop them into the Facebook chat and I will get those questions to Mark. Next week, we're going to have on Edwin Hill. Edwin's an up-and-coming mystery writer, and you should get on that train now because Edwin's career, I think, is about to explode. So we're going to get on to this week now with Mark Leyner. I want to introduce Mark. You know, the first thing to say about Mark is that there's no one in the world quite like Mark. He has produced in the last 30 years some of the funniest, most surreal, most uncategorizable, and downright entertaining postmodernist fiction of any American author. He's the author of the novels Gone with the Mind, The Sugar-Frosted Nutsack. I knew I would crack up when I started reading the titles of your books. My Cousin, My Gastroenterologist, Et tu, Babe, and The Tetherballs of Bougainville. His nonfiction includes the #1 New York Times bestseller, Why Do Men Have Nipples? He's worked for Esquire and George Magazine, and he wrote for the MTV program Liquid Television. Mark's latest book, which is published today, is called The Last Orgy of the Divine Hermit. It is by turns absurd, slapstick, euphoric, violent, explosive, virtuosic, hilarious. I laughed out loud so many times during this book that my kids came into the room and literally asked me what was wrong with me. Honestly, I think this book, Mark and I were talking in the green room. He described this book as being precious to him. I do think it kind of ventures into some incredible new territory. Not only do you have Mark's usual pyrotechnics on the literary side and his kind of zany, idiosyncratic brand of humor, but you also have some real emotional stuff here about mortality and about the love between a father and a daughter. I have a bunch of kind of pull quotes from folks. Sam Lipsyte said about the book, with The Last Orgy, Mark Leyner has outdone himself. For more than 3 decades, he remains the funniest and bravest of writers, not to mention one of the least interested in stale conventions of fiction. And then finally, the New York Times once wrote about Mark, and I love this quote: Mark is either a genius or a freak, and it may not matter which, because his books are compulsively readable, created by a literary mind that seems to have no precedent. He demonstrates how much is still possible for the novel when tradition is left behind, proving that fiction can be robust, provocative, and staggeringly inventive without for a moment forfeiting entertainment. So Mark, welcome to The Thoughtful Bro.
Thank you. I am, I'm intimidated by these things that you and other people have said about me. I don't know that I can rise to can I rise to that level?
Can you rise above?
No, can I be the freak that you need me to be?
I have no doubt. All right. So Mark, why don't we just start by, to the extent that this is even possible with a book like this, but just tell the audience what the book is about.
Well, okay. First of all, you would probably agree with me about this. The word "about" is maybe not the right word to use for what I do and my books, because it doesn't quite get at, I think, what the experience of reading the books is. I don't have a great alternative. For instance, I'll give you an example. I very much wanted to write a book that somehow involved my daughter, Gabby, who's 27 years old. We have a very close relationship. I have a feeling there are many fathers who think they have an exceptionally wonderful relationship with their daughter that's unique, that's unlike anything else. And it's a little like, being in psychoanalysis and being convinced that you're your psychoanalyst's favorite, most fascinating patient. I'm sure there are many fathers that think this, but I'm very convinced that Gabby and I have really the finest father-daughter relationship that's ever happened in humanity. But I wanted to write something involving that. Now, I also had to be careful about it because Gabby's a very sort of sophisticated, private, refined person, as any 27-year-old, I think today. She's very meticulous about curating herself, in social media, et cetera, et cetera. So I was saying to someone, I didn't want to just barge into all that like a bull in a china shop. I wanted to be careful, but make something, and this is a better word than about for me. So I would say Last Orgy of the Divine Hermit is a book that's made out of, rather than about, it's made out of, it's constructed of my relationship with Gabby, and by extension, fathers and daughters. And it's sort of made out of, once I started thinking about that, I was thinking, can I make a book out of, that uses all the little funny private things that Gabby and I have between us? Funny jargon, anecdotes, TV, television shows we've watched together, movies we've watched together, either the kinds that we watch together millions of times, the way you do with little kids, or the ones now that we admire in more as cinephiles, but everything. Can I make something out of all of that, which again is a kind of private secret language? Can I do something with it so that it's delightful to anyone reading it? So that was kind of the first thing. I also wanted to do something that involved reading. Now this will sound stupidly obvious, but I wanted to write a book about reading. Now, you could say, and you haven't because you're being charitable, you're being nice. You could say, Mark, dude, every book is about reading, right? Which is maybe the reason I wanted to do it, because it seems so inane at the beginning. But this is a book, and I mean, you have to read it to fully get what I'm saying. Everything that you as a reader are reading in the book is actually being read by other characters in the book. There's something called spoken word karaoke in the book. It's a bar where the things that people are saying to each other, they're actually reading from screens behind the person they're talking to, and but here's my most brilliant innovation in this book. I will say that out shamelessly. My grandmother used to have this great saying. She would say, "Don't grade your own papers," meaning don't be self-vaunting, right? So I'm going to grade my own papers here. This is the most brilliant point. So what do? I want to write a book about, in part, one of whose dimensions is going to be reading. What do? I situate it in an optometrist's office. So the reading I'm talking about is a patient, reading through one of those things, the eye chart at the other end of the room. I'm proud of myself for doing that. I want someone to say, that's what he meant by a book about reading, and yet it's really, as you know, you've read the book, it's really kind of crucial, because what's being read through the device, which is called a phoropter, I think. I'm forgetting already. I think phoropter. It's that big, heavy, odd-looking thing. where the optometrist changes the lenses to say, you know, is it better like this or like this, that whole thing. What's being read, actually, it turns out, or misread, is really a professor's introduction to the book. And the second half of the book takes place in a country called Silesia. The capital of Silesia, well, everyone knows this, it's Pynchon. And you knew that probably.
I'm glad the book reminded me. I had forgotten that.
Yeah, people do. And so the second part of the book is a figure that is me or like me, and Gabby, my daughter, in the bar Pulpo, which is the #1 spoken word karaoke bar in Pynchon. And so the two halves of the book really kind of mirror each other. You have a kind of older man who is the optometrist and a young woman who's the patient, mirror as a mirror in a way of me and Gabby in the bar.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually a really concise explanation. That actually
I failed to mention the ongoing strife outside of the bar, which is an ongoing sort of gang war between factions of the Chilesian mafia faction, which is part of which was originally the Chilesian Children's Theater. So the Chilesian mafia faction is actually a kind of, what do you call it? A kind of rogue wing of the Chilesian Children's Theater.
That's the more violent wing.
The most violent. Yes, I think I compare them. I say they're a combination of the Gambino family and the Khmer Rouge. So anyway, all of that should give a very clear, simple picture of what my book is about.
All right, well, three things I want to say in response to that, and we'll go into a reading. First, just to kind of tick off a few things that I was thinking while you were talking. So one, about the father-daughter relationship. I mean, you said that you were endeavoring to create something that is like genuine and which is something so private, and kind of make it into something that even someone like me who doesn't personally know you and your daughter could experience. And I thought it frankly was the richest aspect of the book. I thought that your whole kind of like fist bumping, slangy, jokey relationship was like so real. And it anchored the book emotionally while there was all this other zany, hilarious stuff going on. So it really gave this kind of emotional underpinning. So total success there. Go ahead.
Can I say something about that? Because two things go on in this book, which one could think would not work. It would be at cross purposes. I wanted this for a variety of reasons. I wanted this to be, in a way, my most aggressive book. And when I say aggressive, I mean in a generous, entertaining way, but a specific kind of entertainment. And for me, I think what I do, for better or for worse, that maybe a lot of writers wouldn't want to do or be interested in. I'm talking about a kind of recklessness. I'm talking about a kind of unpredictability from sentence to sentence, paragraph to paragraph, an unpredictability that verges on a kind of volatility. Mm-hmm. So I was after a particularly aggressive kind of reckless volatility here, where and there were many times writing the book where something would happen where I would say to myself, if you include that, it's going to ruin the book. Really, it's going to ruin everything you've been doing up until now. And that very thing would invariably turn out to be one of the best, most vibrant, most interesting things in the book. But I would still have to go through a day or 2 days or 3 days of thinking, what am I doing here? You know, yeah. You're going to blow up, you're going to sabotage, you're going to blow up the book irreparably ruin the book. The other thing, I wanted that feeling. This is a book, you're reading a book by someone who's willing at every point to sort of blow it up, you know? But I also wanted to do something I'd never done to this degree before, which is write something. I'm not even going to put this word in quotes because I mean it. Something extraordinarily heartfelt, something extraordinarily poignant, and which is my love for Gabby, my love for my daughter, and specifically, and a lot of the book is about this, specifically my enormous fear of hurting her through my own mortality. I mean, this is just a fact of life that fathers, will die typically, hopefully, in the course of a child's life, and the child will deal with that. It is to me an almost unendurable kind of thing to contemplate hurting Gabby, because we're close by having to have some conversation with her that something's wrong with me or that I'm very sick, or you know so the emotional, that the sort of narrative emotional structure of the book is about this sort of thing, and it's told in all kinds of different ways through various folk tales and et cetera, et cetera. And so to try to do both things, to try to do a book about how agonizing it is for me to contemplate hurting Gabby because I love her so much. A book, again, about a book, we can say about, made out of that. And also a book that's so sort of aggressively volatile. That's the sort of, I think, most interesting thing about this book. It's trying to do two things together that I hadn't done to that extent before, to that degree. There's an extremity in both. I really, and I'm basing this on what people who have told me who've read it, and it's just out, that it, and I'm proudest of this, that it is really, there's an extremity to the emotionalism of the book. And you said that to me before.
I did. Mark, do you feel like what is new in this book compared to your other work is that heartfelt aspect of it most of all?
Oh,
and I guess my question,
without a doubt, I've never done anything like this before. I've never done anything where I try to somehow, wed or meld the two. My usual, I don't know what word you would want to use for it, but sort of usual wildness and comedic wildness wedded somehow to this. I also, there's another thing I do in this book that I've never done before. I think in books previously, the kind of the pleasure of reading it, the reading experience was very much kind of second by second, minute by minute, line by line. This book, again, I think, and I hope successfully, combines that kind of micro experience with a macro experience. There's a story told in this book. There are things that happen as the book ensues. There's one kind of shocking thing that happens sort of in the second half that no one expects, that involves a character from the beginning. I can't say. I've never been able to.
It's a great scene.
I've never been able to talk about a spoiler alert before with a book of mine. There's definitely a big one here, a big one. To which Gabby says to me, I can't believe you just did that, So yes, there are a couple of things I've never done before, but really the main one, and I'm noticing in just some early reviews that are coming out, this is what people are saying. What a poignant book this is. And I want to say one more thing. You're never even going to get a chance to ask another question. I will just go on.
Ages of questions, Mark.
No, you needn't. I mean, you just have to ask me one question, and I will say everything that had to be that your other questions were about. I discovered something about the emotional heart of this book beats so strongly that it's invulnerable to everything I try to do to it. It's almost as if I try to kill it, drown it, electrocute it, carve it up, do everything I can to it, and it's right there. It's right there at the end of the book, when I've done every kind of I've used sort of all of my tricks, all of the ways I can pull the rug out from under, sort of narrative subject matter, all the ways I can just use comedy to make things that seem ridiculous, that seemed completely earnest a sentence before. All of the things that I do, I try to do to this, and yet at the end there is the love between this father, me, and Gabby. I mean, just unscathed, from anything that's been done to it. So
Yeah.
I found that shocked me. I found that kind of remarkable when the book was done.
Yeah, I mean, I think that emotional core, what it does is it allows you, I mean, your writing is so unpredictable, and it's always had this quality of kind of, the experience of it is one of unpredictability, in the sense that, like, when a sentence begins, there's just no way to know where that sentence is going to end. On a line by line level, it does that. Plot wise, it does that as well. But with that beating heart in the middle, you kind of always are brought back over and over again. And I just want to say, like, this is like not a spoiler alert to say, but I mean, towards the very end of the book, there is a poem that is written from the most famous Chilesian poet. It is written entirely in this Chilesian language, which is a language made up of an optometrist chart of letters. So it is not a language that anyone can understand. But I was choked up reading this sequence of random letters, almost, is what it would appear to somebody who hasn't read the whole book. But how does it work that I am getting choked up about this sequence of optometrist letters?
That's among the most wonderful things anyone has said to me, really, about this book. The other, I want to point out, and again, when people see it, they'll know what we're talking about, that took me so long to write. Wow. Those sections, which appear, I can say this, and won't spoil it, may appear to an untutored eye as a kind of gibberish, right? Well, let me tell you, that was a grueling experience. Wow. I challenge someone to write a number of pages like that. Yeah. I mean, it's harder than you think.
I mean, it worked so well.
Anyway, I sort of, that you reach the end, and I have a description of this poet who was imprisoned. Again, this doesn't spoil anything. This is what you find at the very end of the book, is a letter that an imprisoned Chilesian poet has written to his daughter. I mean, because that's what this book is about. And it's on the eve of his execution. Again, getting back to that thing I was telling you about, about the mortality and the grief involved in father-daughter relationships at some point or another. So again, the fact that just those kind of affective ideas, if there is such a thing, it's not an oxymoron, can be so intense that reading this thing in a completely unintelligible language would be moving to you. That it makes me that's such a gratifying thing to hear you say. Thank you.
You're so welcome. No, thank you. All right, let me keep going here. Question number 2. I actually, I did want to read, I did want to ask some more questions, but do you want to do just a quick reading before I forget?
I'll do something really quick.
Yeah.
I can't do a reading that really encompasses everything we've talked about. It's impossible. And a lot of the book is in dialogue between me and Gabby, between the optometrist and the patient. Let me just set up the situation in Kermunkachunk, Chilesia, in case people haven't been reading it's been crowded off the headlines a little bit by some events around here, So let me just read a little bit. On June 26th, 2035, Kermankuchunk, the capital of Chalesia, was engulfed in chaos. The Chalesia Mafia faction, a fanatical offshoot of the Chalesian Children's Theater, had assumed control of the city center and was carrying out mass executions. Enemies, real and especially imagined, were dragged out of their office buildings and gutted in the streets. So begins Last Orgy of the Divine Hermit, in which a father and his daughter in Chalesia, researching an ethnography of the unique criminal subculture of the Chalesian Mafia faction, spend a night at the Bar Pulpo, Kermankuchunk's #1 spoken word karaoke bar, where seemingly extemporaneous conversations are, in actuality, being read from multiple karaoke screens arrayed around the barroom. Moreover, it's Thursday, father-daughter night, when the bar is frequented by actual fathers and daughters, as well as couples role-playing fathers and daughters. Let me just read one last little section about what's going on. Out in the piazza, outside of the Bar Pulpo, because this is important. I just noticed something on, again, grading my own papers, where I say the Bar Pulpo is Kermankuchunk's #1 spoken word karaoke bar. Like there are numerous other ones that are not there, but they're not quite as good, right? The Bar Pulpo is the best. It's #1.
Oh my God. The men's room notwithstanding, the men's room.
Meanwhile, outside on the piazza, sub-factions of the Chalesian Mafia faction vie for supremacy in a never-ending frenzy of stomach-churning savagery. Chalesian Mafia faction street soldiers commit acts of unimaginable sadism, reveling in carnage and the grotesque mutilation of their victims' corpses. But it's worth keeping in mind that these are kids who several years ago, frequently only several weeks ago, several days ago in some cases, were prancing around on stage in a Chalesian Children's Theater's production of Clever Jack and the Magic Beanstalk. These are young people who've traded their exuberant devotion to musical theater for an irrepressible desire to kill and be killed out on the piazza.
I'm just actually so glad you read that, because like that just gives people a taste of what it's like. It's just sort of indescribable, other than like the direct
I've never
experience.
read that out loud before, so I apologize for any mistakes. Can I should I show the book?
Yes, please show the book. Please show the book.
The book?
Yeah, we're gonna have links in the comments on how to buy the book, and so please.
Okay,
please
wonderful.
Do so.
I mean, beautiful, wonderful cover. That's a jug of what I imagine is a drink, a substance called gravy. It's highly alcoholic.
And you and Gabby are doing shots of gravy.
We're doing shots of it all night. It's actually, its origin was actually, I think it's had its origin as some sort of medicine to kill parasitic intestinal worms or something. But it turned out it was so delicious that Chalesians made it their national drink. And yes, Gabby and I are drinking this throughout the book.
Oh my God. All right. So look, I have a bunch of questions from the audience, and like I'm clearly going to get to about a mere fraction of my own questions, but I'm sort of like in my mind ranking the questions I really want to ask you. And so this is a bit of kind of apropos of
If
nothing.
we don't get to everything today, we'll do a mini series like like The Crown or Succession or something. We'll just do a 12-episode mini series.
All right. So here's one. This is again a hard pivot here, but this is just sort of like, you know, you're a guy who is just like, not only have you written all these books and you have this kind of following of people who love your books so much, but you're also a figure that critics kind of love to weigh in on because your work is so unique, so unusual, and so on. And you know, when I like dig into the way critics respond to your work, one thing I just notice is that people often try to ascribe a kind of motive, a kind of message to what you're up to. Like, oh, but like what Mark's really trying to say with this kind of experimental structure is X, Y, Z. And I just have to tell you that particularly reading this book, my experience of the book was, I know that you've said before that what you're trying to do is delight readers and make them laugh. And that was like exactly my experience. So I guess what I want to say to you is like, is it wrong that I went into this book and was laughing and emotionally moved, and then I didn't try to kind of interpret anything in any way beyond that? I mean, that was my experience.
No, I don't. In fact, I think it's exactly correct. I think to a degree, interpretation, and I am not the first person, by a long shot, not the first person to say this, but it is something that I've always had a kind of innate, and I'm talking about ages and ages ago, innate, if not somewhat naive, but deep understanding of, which is the kind of interpretation you're talking about, of ascribing meaning in this way, is frequently, if not intrinsically itself, a way of evading the material, a way of avoiding it, a way of avoiding its impact on you, trying to translate it into something else, trying to translate it into something maybe less disturbing, less sort of less disturbingly comic, in the way that truly comic things can be. Recognitions of enormous unease about life, about being a human being. So I think constantly reading something of mine or of another author, but we're talking about my stuff, constantly trying to say, okay, this is actually something other than what I'm confronting, is it's an evasion. And I'll say this because I believe it. I think it's a cowardly way to read. It's a cowardly way to read my stuff, because I want this. I talked about being aggressive before, and I don't mean aggressive in, hurting the reader or shocking for no good reason the reader. I'm very much in complete solidarity with the reader. That's my feeling about, the reader. The reader. Like I feel like I'm just this, I'm taking the reader for this joyride. You will emerge alive from it at the end.
Well, and I'll tell you, Mark, like,
hopefully.
Yeah, go ahead.
But I think that what I try to do, and everything I'm saying to you today, again, these are things I'm sort of aiming for, endeavoring to do. How successfully I pull this off is not, for me to say, and will differ with various readers, but is to constantly, relentlessly have you, the reader, confront something that is initially completely disturbingly unprecedented. There's not an alternative meaning to it. There's not a translation. It's like, going out into the parking lot long after the mall has closed and encountering this thing, and you don't know, does it want to consume you? Does it want to have sex with you? Does it want to talk to you? Is it there to jumpstart your car? What is this thing? That's the feeling. And I very much, you were right. I mean, it's such a great question. I don't want that translated into a what's called a meaning. I want it to be confronted as something that can only be confronted in and of itself.
And my experience of reading it was one filled with emotions, filled with laughter, sadness, ecstasy, whatever you want to say, strange emotions. And to analyze those emotions and say that the analysis of the emotion is worth more than the emotion themselves, I don't even want to go there. I just want the feel. I want the experience. Experience is a word that you used before, and that's just a great way to describe it, I think.
And you know, the experience, and I do love that word very much, and I really think that's what I think about in all the, as I'm doing this, as I'm making this, especially this book, as I'm making it, I'm constantly thinking, what is the experience going to be of reading this? What is the experience going to be of reading this, preceded by that, and about to be followed by this? That's what I'm sort of all about when I'm doing all the sort of, you know, mad scientist mixing of things, and is what will the experience be like? And as you've said, and again, it's profoundly gratifying to me that you said these sorts of things. The experience at the end of this book is one that's available to any human being, you know, because we're all children, you know, some of us are parents, but we're all children. We know what these feelings are, you know. There's no one who reads this book that by the end of the book will not find some I think fairly deep connection to the emotions that we've been talking about. As funny, you know, as comically weird and wild as some of the you know, features of the book are, in the end, I think it's one of the, it's a very common feeling of the heart that you're left with.
Absolutely. And so look, I'm going to move into audience questions after this, but I just want to say that, like, Mark, it's a very subtle thing, but it's something that's, to my mind, all important in the art of fiction. And that is that I had a strong feeling throughout the work, and you said it even before I asked you this, that you really cared about my experience of the work. And that might seem like some kind of thing that's so obvious to say to somebody, like, of course a writer cares about the reader. Oh no, it is not always the case. And I just feel like it is such an act of generosity. Like, humor is such an act of generosity in a way. Like, you really want me to laugh. You really want me to be like blown away. You want me to be just kind of swept up in this. And I just want to say that, like, that fostered a relationship of trust with me and the manuscript. It made me think, oh, this guy, he wants me to have an experience, and it's worrying him, like, what experience I will have. And
it's so, again, I appreciate you. I mean, you're such a wonderful reader for me. Really, this is, I'm telling you, this is better for me than it is for you. This experience, my experience. Yeah. It's what you say is absolutely dynamically true for me. And over the past, I don't know at this point how long I've been doing this. I mean, it's decades and decades now at this point. But, you know, every now and then someone will say, typically in a pejorative sense, that I use irony, or there's a lot of irony in my work. And I've always resisted that in a very vociferous, if not really sort of truculent, violent way, because it's so not what I do. What I do is it's completely unironic in a way. What I do is very, and this is very deliberate, is very transparent. The Chilesian language, the way I form it, is very transparent. And I mean, I can say this again, it's not going to ruin anything. I didn't try to make something that looks like a fake language, that looks like a language. It looks like what it is, which I won't get into, but so, because I want the reader to see, oh, that's what it is. And this idea of solidarity and trust is vitally important to what I want my relationship with the reader to be. And again, getting back to the experience, I want a reader to know, like, I want a reader to think I can hang in with this guy.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm not sure what this is. Again, it's kind of like, you know, a joyride where you have some trust of the driver.
Hmm.
It's going to be okay. But the trust is really important, and it's completely unironic. But yes, this idea of trust and solidarity. I would say again, since we're being so sentimental today, we're talking about the heart. I mean, there's a kind of love a love I think you have to have in reading these books of mine, sort of a love for this kind of experience, and kind of reciprocal affection and generosity and trust. Yeah.
All right, so Mark, we're running out of time here, but I want to like get to a bunch of these audience
Running out of time,
questions.
you've asked one question.
Well,
No,
literally, I asked
I'm
two.
joking. All right,
Um,
sure.
all right, so I have a couple requests. People want to see this poetry in the Chilesian language. Can you just like open up to a page and just show them what it looks like?
Yeah.
I mean, it starts on the very first page as like a true optometrist chart, and you have no
Well,
idea.
I'm going to show. It's better to see a page of it.
Yeah.
Also let's assure the reader that the entire book is not in Chile.
Right.
Tell me what's legible. Should I put
I mean, you can see. I mean, like, you can see the different words and letters, but yeah, I mean, we get the picture.
No, a typical page. Again, I don't want people to think the whole book. I mean, there's a lot of pages. They're in dialogue.
Yeah.
It's in. Don't worry, it's in English. There are examples of little phrases and translations. You were talking to me before about this, and it's one of the characters that is one of my favorites. He's our waiter. Gabby and I have a waiter at the bar who explains the Chilesian language to us, and it's pretty good, right? The waiter's very funny.
I was crying. I mean, because basically, like, we don't have time to go into the whole thing, but just to explain to people, it's basically like the waiter is like explaining, like, oh, they're like sort of like, well, what does this phrase mean in Chilesian? And he's like, oh, it means like, Shreka the movie, but like it can also mean like, and then there's some super long thing that it means it's totally about something.
But one
else.
of the things we didn't talk about, again, it's hard to, even for me, to characterize these things. One of the charms, but one of the difficulties of the Chilesian language is that a lot of the words, the same word can mean many, like 20, 30, 40, 50 things. And the same word, it looks and sounds exactly alike. And I say frequently, Chilesians have sort of no idea what the other person's talking about, because it could mean so many different things. So the waiter is trying to explain to us, oh, this could mean that, but in a certain context, it could also mean an entirely different thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and the kind of the juxtaposition of the meanings is like what is so funny. All right.
Can I say one last quick thing?
Yeah.
About the way that last page looked? It's also a bit of my little joke for people who sometimes say about my work, it's too crazy. Like, it's almost, to me, it's kind of like meaningless gibberish to me. Leyner's stuff is like so weird and wild. So I in a way, I want to say, okay, you want some gibberish here,
And yet it's like, in many ways, the most moving part of the book. I mean, I don't know how to explain that, but you just got to read it. All right. What is Gabby's reaction to the book?
Gabby's reaction, luckily, has been marvelous, and she loves it, and she took a very long time reading it because she said it was too emotional for her to just read. And I was worried not that Gabby wouldn't think it's funny or have a typical reader's reaction, a typical reaction of someone who enjoys what I do. I was worried, again, this is the subject matter of the book, I was worried that it would make her sad. And I think to a degree it did, but she has survived. You know, again, I do say in the book at some point, am I such a narcissist that I think, you know, oh, something, my own death would mean that, you know, this other human being couldn't possibly survive, you know. And it is the kind of narcissistic feeling I think fathers have sometimes, that without them, what is everyone else in the world going to do? Everything will fall apart without them, which is not quite the case. But
Oh no, it didn't feel that way to me at all. But anyway, I see what you're saying. All right, so here's a reader question. Quote, the only other writer I can think of as a precursor to you is Thomas Pynchon. What are your thoughts on his work? Was he an important writer for you?
I think, you know, Pynchon's a great reader. I'm not an enormous reader of contemporary writers, especially if I've been told that there are likenesses, because it worries me, you know, so I sort of stay away. There are writers I'm not going to get to until later in life. I probably will be demented by then, so it'll be the perfect time to to read sort of more contemporaries of mine. Pynchon's a little, you know, he's older, but no, I think the things there are. I mean, I can tell you really quickly writers that I think were influential to me tended to be older. Older. I mean, from a different time. You know, the writers like Arthur Rimbaud, a great influence on me. There were writers from the sort of beat generation, Burroughs, Kerouac, Ginsberg. There were poets, John Ashbery, Frank O'Hara. I'm just going all over the place now. All Keats and Shelley when I first read them. Alfred Jarry. There are lots of French writers. It's pretentious even to say French names in the middle of the day. I think one shouldn't do that. It's too pretentious. And then a lot of things that were extra literary, that were equally important. Cartoons when I was young had an enormous, animated cartoons, enormous influence on me. Like Popeye cartoons, Chuck Jones, sort of classic kind of Bugs Bunny stuff, enormously influential on making me feel that one can do anything. One, from moment to moment, one can, you know, make a kind of, as I said, reckless leap anywhere. That was instilled in me probably by watching those kinds of things, those like a Chuck Jones cartoon or the Fleischer Brothers, when we're talking about Popeye, more than anything in literature.
And I actually want to ask a follow-up question of my own that I've been meaning to ask, which was like, you had said earlier, toward at the top of the conversation, that you thought you'd come across ideas that you thought, okay, this will ruin my book if I put this in, and then it ends up in the work, which brought to mind a question for me. Somebody who's writing in a more traditional literary style, there's a lot of guideposts for like the kind of things to put into a traditional narrative, the kinds of conflict and character development and setting and so on, right? You don't play by any of those rules, which begs the question, how do you decide what to put into your book? Like, how do you know when something is working or not working? Which it sounds like you made some tough decisions about that for this work.
It's a great question, a crucial question. I don't, and really the most generous, accurate answer to give you is I don't know how to describe how I know. I mean, I do somehow. It's quite agonizing, the process. It takes a long time for me to write these books. I think time is important. I think if something seems interesting to me and has a sting to it or has a poignancy to it, over time it gives me some confidence, you know, that it's got sort of this, it's shelf life, it's still working, it's, you know.
Sting is a great word. Yeah.
But it's because of what you said, because there aren't the usual guideposts, it's particularly grueling. It's particularly painful. I mean, it really feels like a sort of war. I've said this to friends, like a war I'm waging against myself, you know, because we all have we're all inculcated with ways of telling stories, you know, and I find myself falling back on certain conventions or falling back on things I know I can do, that and being furious at myself, and being furious at myself most of the time that I'm doing this. Like, how could you think that was enough? How could you think that's sufficiently as stinging, you know, and being angry at myself? So it's, I mean, I hope at the end, I hope it's a, I'm basing this on what you have said, that it's a delightful and emotional experience reading this book, but it's not a delightful experience for me doing it. It's very difficult, really. It's like wandering around in the pitch black, knowing that sort of enemies are everywhere and mines are laid everywhere, and not quite understanding how to navigate through it. And the enemy and the mines are me. They're my own. They're of my own, you know, device. Yeah. So it's, I don't know. That's very incoherent what I just said, but it's hard to tell you beyond that how
no, that was quite poetic, actually. I got the picture very clearly. All right, look.
Don't try it at home.
All right, I'm going to take one more quickie from the audience to try to just make a quick answer for this, and then I'll have one final question. But the question is just about, to kind of paraphrase the question, it's about Hollywood, and it's about how, you know, you made a great literary reputation for yourself in the 90s. Then you sort of took some time off writing books. You went to Hollywood, and now you've come back and you started writing books again. I guess as concisely as you can you describe, you know, why you came back to books, and is this a permanent thing, or are you done with Hollywood, that kind of thing?
Yes, it's a permanent thing. I mean, what we're calling Hollywood, you know, it was a way to just make extra money. I mean, writers do different things. They teach typically, do kinds of journalism, write columns, do different things. I somehow got myself into this. It can be lucrative for small periods of time. I don't particularly love the people involved in that business. I actually got hit by a car working on a movie in LA because I made the mistake of trying to actually walk in Los Angeles. And I was immediately struck down. I deserved it. And so I was kind of laid up for a while, and I was reading, I mean, I remember the book, I was reading Moby Dick, which I had never read before. Again, one of these things I was saving till later. And it just reignited in me sort of the love of books and what I had been doing. And no, I'm going to be writing books until I'm, I guess, hit by a car again.
Right. All right.
That seems to be what causes the great, you know, my great aesthetic shifts is being struck by motor vehicles.
All right. So look, to wrap up, I just want to ask you, I ask this question to everybody who comes on the show. I'm particularly interested to hear your answer to this. So imagine that you have an ideal reader for your book, somebody who's kind of like getting your book in exactly the way that you want it to be gotten. And just imagine that reader closes the book on the last page. Just describe for me in a phrase or even a word, what is the feeling that you want that reader to have?
I can tell you in 3 words: sweaty and happy.
Mission accomplished. Oh my God.
That? I bet you didn't expect something so.
I didn't. I knew it was going to be good.
So succinct for me. I think that's the first time I've ever answered a question in 3 words: sweaty and happy.
Well, I see I have to preface it by saying in a word or a phrase, Mark.
Yeah, that's right. If you had said that like 8 hours ago.
All right, Mark, can you hold up the book one last time?
Of course.
Awesome. All right, folks, Last Orgy of the Divine Hermit. It is everything we just talked about and more. It is just like, I mean, I think in one word, it's an experience. You're not going to have an experience like this anytime soon. So I give my highest recommendation. And Mark, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. It was wonderful, really.
Great.
Wonderful.
All right, folks, we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.